Imagine looking up at the night sky and seeing the moon, not as the calm, familiar glow we've always known, but as a looming giant, growing larger every night, creeping closer until the thought hits you. What if one day the moon didn't just shine above us, but came crashing down to destroy everything we know? If you enjoyed exploring the hidden world beneath our feet, make sure to hit subscribe. There's so much more waiting to be uncovered. When we think about the moon, most of us picture a glowing, gentle presence in the night sky, a silent companion that has been with Earth for billions of years. But the moon is far more than a light in the darkness. It is a force of balance, a stabilizer, and without it, life on Earth as we know, it would look drastically different. Before we even imagine the catastrophic idea of the moon colliding with Earth, we need to pause and ask ourselves, what does the moon already mean to us, and why does it matter so much? The first and perhaps most visible way the moon affects Earth is through the tides. Every day, ocean water rises and falls because of the gravitational pull of the moon. This constant push and pull has not only shaped coastlines and ecosystems, but also played an essential role in the development of life itself. Scientists believe that in Earth's early days, tidal pools created by the moon's pull may have provided the conditions where primitive life could thrive, evolve, and eventually crawl onto land. Even now, countless marine species depend on tidal rhythms to feed, reproduce, and survive. The moon's influence on the oceans is quite literally woven into the fabric of life on this planet. If the moon were not there, those tides would shrink dramatically and the rich cycle of coastal ecosystems would collapse. But the moon's gift to Earth is not limited to the oceans. It also acts as a stabilizer for Earth's tilt on its axis. Our planet is tilted at about 23.5 degrees, and this tilt is what gives us our seasons. The moon's steady gravitational pull keeps that tilt from wobbling too much over time. Without it, Earth's axis could swing wildly, veering by tens of degrees, and the consequences would be staggering. Imagine a world where one decade might see scorching heat at the poles, while another might plunge the equator into icy winters. Such instability would make it incredibly difficult for life, especially human civilization, to adapt and survive. Our agriculture, our cities, our very way of planning for the future all depend on the relative predictability of seasons. And it is the moon that quietly keeps that order in place. Beyond the tides and the tilt, the moon has also been a shield and a storyteller. When asteroids or comets approach Earth, the moon sometimes takes the hit. Its pockmarked surface, covered in craters, is a record of billions of years of impacts, many of which could have been far more devastating if they had struck Earth instead. And as much as it protects us, the moon also inspires us. For thousands of years, it has guided travelers, marked the passage of time, influenced art, poetry, and myth. It has been a mirror for human curiosity, eventually even drawing us to take the bold step of leaving Earth and walking on another world. So when we begin to imagine the scenario of the moon colliding with Earth, we are not just thinking of a rock crashing into our planet. We are talking about losing something that is deeply tied to our very existence. The moon is not a passive bystander in the sky. It is an active partner in Earth's story. It shapes the rhythm of the oceans, holds steady the balance of our seasons, and has even shielded us from cosmic threats. It is in many ways one of the reasons life has had the chance to thrive here. That is why, before we leap into the chaos of a possible collision, it is worth recognizing the profound role the moon already plays. It is not just a backdrop for romance or a subject of mythology. It is a stabilizing force, a life shaper or guardian, and a reminder of how finely tuned our planet really is. And when we imagine the moon suddenly becoming a destroyer rather than a protector, the true weight of that scenario becomes all the more powerful. And so, to think of the moon colliding with Earth is not only to imagine destruction, but to reflect on how much we rely on the quiet stability it provides every single day. The thought of the moon colliding with Earth might sound like the opening scene of a science fiction movie, but before we dive too deeply into the imagery of such destruction, it's important to pause and recognize something. the chances of this ever happening are practically zero. The moon is locked in a stable orbit around Earth, a delicate gravitational dance that has lasted for billions of years. It is actually drifting away from us, slowly but steadily, at a rate of about 4 centimeters per year. That means, in reality, the moon is not on a crash course, it's retreating. Yet, even knowing this, there's something powerful about entertaining the what-if. By imagining the impossible, we can uncover truths about our world, the forces of the universe, and the fragility of the balance that makes life here possible. When we say the moon is locked in orbit, we're talking about a cosmic equilibrium. Earth's gravity holds onto the moon, while the moon's momentum keeps it from spiraling inward. This balance is incredibly stable. Over billions of years, minor changes occur, but there is no natural mechanism by which the moon suddenly decides to plunge toward Earth. To imagine a collision, you would need an outside force, a massive cosmic event, perhaps a wandering planet-sized object, or some unpredictable gravitational disturbance from deep space that knocks the moon out of its current orbit. Such scenarios are not realistic in the near or even distant future, but they open the door for us to think about consequences, to stretch our understanding of scale and power beyond everyday life. Why then do we indulge in such an unlikely scenario? It's because our minds often grasp concepts more deeply through extremes. When we picture the moon crashing into Earth, we are confronted with the enormous forces at play in the universe. We realize how small and fragile our existence truly is in the face of cosmic mechanics. It forces us to appreciate that stability is not something to take for granted. It is a rare gift. The very fact that we live in a system where the moon orbits at just the right distance to balance Earth's tilt, influence the tides, and yet not destabilize the planet is remarkable. A collision might be nearly impossible, but the contemplation of it helps us see just how finely tuned our reality already is. It also reveals something about human nature. We are fascinated by catastrophes, by endings, by the thought of the unimaginable. Asking a what if the moon hit Earth is not so different from asking what happens if the sun explodes or if a black hole wandered into our solar system. These are thought experiments, ways of pushing the boundaries of our imagination and our science. They are not predictions, but they sharpen our sense of scale. By imagining the moon's impossible fall, we come to appreciate the extraordinary stability of its current orbit. From a scientific perspective, we know the moon's orbit is not static, but dynamic. Tidal forces between Earth and the moon actually transfer energy, gradually pushing the moon farther away. If anything, billions of years from now, the moon will be so distant that its influence on tides and axial stability will lessen. The danger in the long view is not collision but separation, a slow drift that changes the rhythm of Earth's natural systems. But again, this is on a scale so vast that it is hard for us to grasp, stretching into a future where humanity may or may not even exist. By considering collision, however, we can build a bridge between the abstract and the visceral. We can imagine the skies growing larger as the moon looms closer, the tides rising to monstrous levels, the crust of the Earth trembling with gravitational strain. And even if these images will never unfold in reality, they give us an emotional connection to the forces of space. They remind us that we live not on an isolated world, but as part of a cosmic system where every planet, moon, and star follows a delicate path determined by gravity. So yes, a moon-Earth collision is virtually impossible. It does not keep astronomers awake at night, nor should it. But when we allow ourselves to envision it, we are not predicting the end of the world. We are exercising imagination as a tool for perspective. We are learning to see how precious our current stability is, how extraordinary it is that we orbit in harmony with a companion that shapes our tides, seasons, and history. The improbability of collision makes the scenario all the more valuable, because it highlights how much we stand to lose and how much we already have in the quiet, reliable dance of Earth and its moon. And so, even in its impossibility, the idea of the moon colliding with Earth helps us understand and cherish the fragile balance that makes life possible. If the moon ever began to drift closer to Earth instead of moving away, the first signs of catastrophe would not come from a sudden impact, but from the oceans themselves. The moon's gravitational pull is the reason we have tides, and the closer it gets, the stronger that pull becomes. Right now, the difference between high tide and low tide is something most of us accept as ordinary, sometimes inconvenient, but always predictable. Yet if the moon were to approach, even gradually, those tides would begin to swell beyond anything we have ever experienced. Coastal areas that rely on the rhythm of the tides would start to flood regularly, not just during storms or full moons. The gentle ebb and flow of the sea would turn violent, swallowing harbors, farmland, and entire cities that line the world's coasts. Imagine standing by the ocean and seeing the water rise not by a few feet, but by tens of meters. The moon's pull would lift entire swells of ocean toward it, and as Earth rotated, those swells would sweep across continents. Places like New York, London, Mumbai, and Shanghai, already vulnerable to sea level rise, would be consumed by water. This wouldn't just be a matter of losing property or landmarks. It would dismantle the foundations of modern civilization. Billions of people live in coastal regions, and they would have no choice but to flee inland. Refugee crises on an unimaginable scale would unfold, sparking chaos, hunger, and desperation long before the moon actually touched Earth. The devastation would not stop at the shorelines. The gravitational stress pulling at the oceans would also strain Earth's crust. Earthquakes would grow in frequency and magnitude as the planet's surface shifted under competing forces. Volcanoes might erupt in chains as molten rock was squeezed and tugged by gravitational distortions. The very ground we walk on would lose its sense of stability, turning familiar landscapes into shifting, treacherous terrain. Entire regions could become uninhabitable almost overnight, reshaping maps not through human conflict or politics, but through the brute force of celestial mechanics. And with the tide so drastically altered, weather patterns would spiral out of control. The circulation of ocean currents, which regulates climate across the globe, would be disrupted. Warm waters might stagnate in some places, while cold currents vanish in others. The Gulf Stream, which keeps much of Europe temperate, could collapse. Monsoons, hurricanes, and typhoons would no longer follow predictable paths, and storms could grow into megastorms fueled by the violent mixing of rising tides and unstable winds. Agriculture, already threatened by shifting coastlines, would be struck again as rainfall and seasons fell into chaos. Humanity, with all its technology, would find itself at the mercy of a climate spinning beyond comprehension. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect would be how visible it all became. As the moon moved closer, it would loom larger and larger and larger in the sky, dominating our nights and even casting eerie shadows during the day. Its approach would be impossible to ignore, a constant reminder of the disaster tightening around us. Every glance upward would fill us with dread, as though the heavens themselves were pressing down on Earth. Cultural responses would vary: panic, denial, cult-like worship, but the psychological strain of watching the moon swell in the sky would weigh heavily on every society. Life in the seas would also face collapse. Marine species rely on the stability of tidal patterns. If the tide surged unpredictably, delicate ecosystems like coral reefs, estuaries, and mangrove forests would disintegrate. Fish migrations would fail, breeding cycles would shatter, and the oceans that provide food for billions of people would turn hostile. Humanity, already driven inland, would now struggle to feed itself as both land and sea betrayed the balance they had once maintained. The chaos caused by tides alone would be enough to unravel civilizations. Wars could break out over dwindling resources. Nations might collapse under the strain of displaced populations. Governments would scramble to maintain order as infrastructures buckled, roads, power plants, and water systems destroyed not by bombs, but by relentless waves and quakes. The moon's gradual descent would become the ultimate slow-motion disaster, offering no safe haven anywhere on Earth. What makes this scenario even more sobering is that all of this destruction would happen before the moon ever struck the planet. The collision itself would certainly be the final act, but the approach, the tidal chaos, the storms, the quakes, the collapse of ecosystems would deliver devastation long before impact. Humanity would be brought to its knees not by the crash itself, but by the violent unraveling of the natural systems that the moon had once so carefully balanced. And so, as we imagine the moon moving closer, it becomes clear that the first true sign of doom would be written in the waves, in the tides that once nurtured life but would now rise up to tear it apart. If the moon continued its deadly approach, the chaos of the tides would only be the beginning. The closer it came, the more violently its gravitational pull would grip not only the oceans but the very body of the Earth itself. Our planet is not a solid, immovable sphere. It is layered, with a thin crust floating on molten rock and shifting plates. The moon's increasing tug would begin to twist and stretch these layers in ways that Earth was never meant to endure. The ground beneath us, which feels so steady and permanent in daily life, would betray us as the planet shuddered under the strain of competing forces. Earthquakes, which we already fear in their natural occurrences, would become routine, erupting not just along fault lines but across regions that had long been considered geologically stable. Cities far from seismic zones would suddenly find themselves shaking apart as the stress built and released without warning. Buildings, bridges, and infrastructure designed to withstand ordinary tremors would crumble under the relentless pressure. Each quake would feel less like an isolated disaster and more like another pulse in the slow unraveling of the planet. At the same time, volcanic activity would surge to unimaginable levels. Volcanoes are driven by pressures within Earth's mantle, and the moon's gravitational pull would be like a cosmic hand squeezing those forces to the surface. Dormant volcanoes would awaken, spewing ash and lava into skies, already clouded by chaos. Entire mountain ranges might collapse in fiery eruptions, and supervolcanoes, like Yellowstone, could be forced into cataclysmic explosions, filling the atmosphere with ash that blocks out sunlight across the globe. The Earth would not just be trembling, it would be bleeding fire. This gravitational warping would not stop at land. The very shape of Earth could begin to distort, pulled slightly out of its near-perfect sphere, as the moon's approach stretched it like taffy. So even small distortions in the planet's form would have devastating effects on ecosystems, weather, and the rotation of Earth itself. Days and nights could begin to change in length as the spinning of the planet faltered under uneven stresses. For humans who rely on precision, on clocks, calendars, and predictable cycles, the shifting of time itself would symbolize the complete collapse of order. And then there would be the human experience of living through such a nightmare. Imagine trying to sleep while the ground quakes nightly, while distant mountains glow red from rivers of lava, while the sky grows dark with volcanic ash and the air fills with the acrid stench of sulfur. Even before the moon touched Earth, the environment would be turning hostile to human life. Crops would fail, not only from flooding and storms, but from the choking darkness that would linger over regions blanketed in volcanic clouds. Breathing would become a struggle in many places, as fine ash settled into lungs and poisoned the air. Animals, too, would face annihilation. Migration routes would be obliterated, habitats incinerated, and food chains shredded. The few species that managed to survive the floods of rising tides would now be cornered by erupting mountains and shaking lands. The delicate balance that sustains biodiversity would collapse in a fraction of the time it took to build, undoing millions of years of evolution in a few short months of chaos. What would humanity do in such circumstances? Some might retreat underground, building shelters to withstand earthquakes and protect from ash, but survival would be temporary. Others might attempt to flee across the globe, but where would they go? every part of Earth would be feeling the moon's relentless pull. The concept of safe zones would evaporate. There would be no corner untouched by the gravitational fury overhead. It is important to remember that these gravitational effects would come in waves of increasing severity. At first, quakes would seem like coincidences, volcanic eruptions like isolated tragedies. But soon the pattern would emerge and the realization would set in. The moon's approach was not only unstoppable, but also merciless. Every day it grew larger in the sky. Every day the shaking grew worse, until humanity could no longer deny that the very structure of the Earth was crumbling under invisible but unstoppable forces. So when we imagine the moon colliding with Earth, we cannot think of it as a single catastrophic moment of impact. The true horror would be in the approach, in the way gravity itself would betray us, turning the ground into a weapon and the air into poison. The moon would not simply strike. It would tear apart the planet long before the final collision. And so if the moon ever drew close enough, gravity would not just shape tides. It would unravel the Earth itself, shaking, breaking, and burning it beyond recognition. At the moment of impact, all the tidal surges, the earthquakes, and the volcanic eruptions that came before would suddenly seem small compared to what followed. If the moon collided with Earth, it would not drift gently down from the sky. It would slam into our planet at an extraordinary speed, around 10 kilometers per second. To put that into perspective, that's faster than a bullet leaving a gun, and we are not talking about something the size of a rock or even a mountain. We are talking about an object over 3,400 kilometers wide, a mass so immense that the energy released would be far beyond anything humanity has ever been able to imagine. Scientists estimate that the impact would unleash energy equivalent to billions of nuclear bombs detonating at once. It would dwarf the asteroid strike that ended the reign of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, which itself was devastating enough to wipe out nearly 3/4 of Earth's species. That asteroid was about 10 kilometers wide. The moon is more than 300 times larger. The comparison alone is enough to show that this would not be a localized disaster, but a global, all-encompassing cataclysm. The moment of collision would be marked by unimaginable violence. The surface of both Earth and the moon would vaporize instantly at the point of contact, turning rock into plasma in a fraction of a second. A blinding flash of light would spread across the sky, brighter than the sun itself, as kinetic energy transformed into heat. For anyone who might still be alive to witness it, there would be no time to flee, no chance to seek shelter. The energy released would be so vast that it would envelop the entire planet almost instantly. Shockwaves would ripple through Earth's mantle and core, shattering the planet's surface in ways we cannot fully picture. Mountains would crumble as though they were made of sand. Continents would split apart. The oceans would boil, their waters hurled into the atmosphere before evaporating entirely. Any remnants of civilization, cities, monuments, even the traces of roads and walls would be erased in the blink of an eye. What had once been a thriving planet would be transformed into a molten wasteland. The atmosphere itself would not survive in its current form. Vast quantities of debris would be ejected into space, some hurled so far that they might orbit the sun as new asteroids, others raining back down in a storm of fire. The skies would glow red with molten rock falling like rain, setting what little remained of it. The air would thicken with vaporized metal and dust until the boundary between Earth and space was blurred. Breathing, seeing, surviving, these concepts would no longer apply. The environment would be destroyed on every possible level. The heat generated by the impact would be so intense that it could melt not just the crust, but large portions of Earth's mantle. The entire oceans of lava would spread across the surface, glowing rivers of molten rock, stretching for thousands of kilometers. For a time, Earth would resemble its earliest form, billions of years ago when it was still young and molten before life had ever taken root. The collision would not just destroy civilization, it would reset the planet itself to its most primal state. The sound of such an event would also be beyond comprehension. On the surface, it would not even register as sound in the way we experience it, but as an overwhelming pressure wave, flattening everything. Entire atmospheres would be compressed and displaced in fractions of seconds, sending supersonic blasts of destruction across the globe. Yet in truth, no one would remain to hear it. By the time the first shock reached them, humanity would already be gone. From space, the collision would look like two worlds merging in fire. The moon, once serene and pale, would dissolve into Earth in a cataclysm of molten stone and incandescent gas. For the solar system, this would not be unusual. Collisions like this were common in the early days of planetary formation. But for Earth, for us, it would mean the end of the long story of life. And yet, it is in imagining this scale of destruction that we begin to truly appreciate the stability we have always known. The moon has been a quiet guardian for billions of years, influencing tides, seasons, and life itself. But if it were ever to turn from companion to destroyer, its final act would be swift and merciless. And so, the moment of collision would not simply be the end of humanity, it would be the erasure of Earth as we know it. A single instant of unimaginable energy rewriting the story of our world. In the seconds after the moon finally struck Earth, the world as we knew it would be gone. The collision would release such unimaginable energy that the very crust of the planet would tear apart, melting into a sea of fire and vapor. But the real horror would unfold in the aftermath. The surface of both Earth and the moon would be instantly vaporized at the point of impact, but that vapor would not remain local. It would spread outward across the entire globe, turning land, sea, and sky into a churning storm of molten debris. The world would become unrecognizable in a matter of moments. Imagine an ocean, not of water, but of magma stretching across continents, swallowing everything that once stood upon them. Cities would vanish, mountain ranges would flatten, forests would burn before disintegrating entirely. The oceans themselves, already boiling from the immense heat, would be driven upward into the sky as superheated steam, before dispersing into space or condensing briefly, only to rain back down as scalding storms. Life on Earth, from the smallest microorganism to the last surviving human, would be erased without a trace. Above this molten wasteland, the atmosphere would collapse into chaos. Trillions of tons of rock and dust would be blasted upward, some escaping Earth's gravity entirely and launching into the solar system, while the rest formed a dense, fiery shroud encircling the planet. The skies would glow with incandescent fragments, streaking in all directions as if Earth itself had turned into a giant firework of destruction. The surface would be buried under a rain of molten rock, an inferno falling from the heavens. What little structure remained intact after the initial collision would be pulverized under the ceaseless bombardment of returning debris. The energy release would not only melt Earth's crust, but much of the mantle beneath it. This would create what scientists call a magma ocean, a global sea of liquid rock covering the planet. Temperatures would soar to thousands of degrees, enough to sterilize the entire surface and ensure that nothing resembling life could endure. For thousands of years, the Earth would glow red, a young planet reborn, eerily resembling its earliest state more than 4 billion years ago. The collision would also hurl fragments of Earth and Moon into orbit. Some of this debris would eventually coalesce, forming rings around Earth, much like the rings of Saturn. These rings would not last forever. Over time, gravity would draw some of the material back down in fiery showers, while the rest might drift away into space. But for a time, Earth would be circled by glowing bands of dust and molten rock, a haunting reminder of the violence that had remade it. The skies, once blue and nurturing, would be transformed into a choking haze of ash and gas. The collision would likely strip away much of the atmosphere, leaving behind only fragments of toxic vapor. Breathing would no longer be possible, but of course, there would be no living creatures left to attempt it. The delicate balance that had allowed life to exist for billions of years, the air, the water, the temperate climate, would be gone, replaced by a hostile alien environment, and the destruction would not stop at Earth's surface. Deep within the planet, shockwaves from the collision would reverberate through the mantle and core. The molten core might be destabilized, creating violent plumes of molten iron and nickel that surged upward. For a time, Earth's magnetic field, which shields us from harmful solar radiation, would collapse entirely, leaving the planet exposed to the fury of the sun. If, by some miracle, any form of life had clung on in sheltered pockets, it would now face an even harsher, unprotected world. From the perspective of space, the aftermath would look like a cosmic wound. Earth would no longer be the familiar blue and green jewel, but a glowing, molten sphere surrounded by a halo of dust and fragments. It would be as though the planet had been reset, stripped back to its raw beginnings with no trace of the civilizations, histories, or ecosystems that had once flourished there. And yet, even in this devastation, there is a strange continuity with the past. Billions of years ago, Earth itself was shaped by violent impacts like this. In fact, scientists believe that our moon was born from a colossal collision between the young Earth and a Mars-sized body. That impact scattered debris into orbit, which eventually coalesced into the moon we know today. In a way, the destruction of Earth by its own moon would be a cycle closing, the story of our planet ending much as it began, in fire and chaos. And so, the immediate aftermath of the moon's collision would not simply be destruction. It would be a total reset, a planet reduced to molten rock and dust, stripped of all memory of the life it once nurtured. When we picture the moon colliding with Earth, it is easy to focus on the spectacular visuals. The fire, the molten oceans, the massive shockwaves that would tear the planet apart. But beneath all of that imagery lies the most profound consequence of all, the fate of life itself. Every plant, every animal, every human being, every microscopic organism would face forces so immense that survival would be impossible. Humanity, with all its achievements and ingenuity, would be swept away in an instant. The civilizations we built, the knowledge we stored in libraries and servers, the art, the languages, the memories, all of it would vanish without a trace. The question of survival is not even a question at all. In the face of such a cosmic collision, there would be no hiding, no escaping, no second chances for us. Long before the final impact, life would already be in crisis. As the moon drew closer, the tidal surges, the volcanic eruptions, and the constant earthquakes would have driven humanity into chaos. Populations would be displaced, food sources would collapse, and the environment would become increasingly hostile. Even the most advanced shelters designed to withstand disasters would crumble under relentless quakes or floods. Humanity's ingenuity has allowed us to overcome countless challenges, but this would not be a challenge. It would be a force beyond all capacity to resist. Civilizations that had once dreamed of conquering space would be reduced to scattered remnants, desperately clinging to survival as the planet unraveled beneath them. At the very moment of collision, life's final threads would be cut. The shock waves of impact would tear through the biosphere, vaporizing land and boiling seas. Temperatures would rise to thousands of degrees in seconds, sterilizing every corner of the planet. Forests, oceans, grasslands, deserts, all of it would be erased in a wave of molten destruction. For animals and plants, there would be no refuge. For humans, there would be no escape. Even if someone had managed to construct a bunker or retreat underground, the energy unleashed by the impact would penetrate deep into the crust, collapsing caverns, boiling groundwater, and suffocating everything beneath the earth. No species, no matter how hardy, could withstand such a total annihilation. And yet, when we step back and consider this scenario through the lens of cosmic history, a strange thought emerges. Life itself has always been both fragile and resilient. Time and again, catastrophic events have wiped out enormous portions of Earth's species, only for life to rebound, adapt, and evolve into new forms. The asteroid that killed the dinosaurs seemed like the end of the world. But from that devastation came an opportunity for mammals, including us, to rise. Life flourishes in the quiet moments between these upheavals, but those upheavals are part of the very fabric of existence. They remind us that Earth is not isolated, not immune to the forces that shape the stars and planets around us. This perspective also challenges how we view our own place in the cosmos. We often see ourselves as separate, as if human civilization stands apart from the natural history of the universe. But in truth, we are the product of these very collisions. Our existence is bound to them. If another impact were to happen, whether from an asteroid, a rogue planet, or even the moon, would not be something unnatural, but rather the continuation of the same cosmic story that brought us here. That bigger perspective does not erase the tragedy of imagining life wiped away, but it does frame it differently. It allows us to see that destruction and creation are not opposites. They are partners in the universe's dance. Without the colossal destruction of the past, Earth would not have the conditions that allowed humans to rise. Without impacts, there would be no moon to light our skies, no tides to shape our coasts, no stable tilt to nurture the diversity of life. And so, to imagine the moon colliding with Earth is also to remember that the moon itself is proof of creation, born from catastrophe. And so, when we think of the moon striking Earth, we must see it not just as an end, but as part of the same cycle that has always defined the universe. Destruction giving way to creation, and endings intertwined with beginnings. When we allow ourselves to imagine something as extreme as the moon crashing into Earth, it is not really because we expect it to happen. The chances of such a collision are so close to impossible that scientists assure us it is not a danger we need to fear. But thought experiments like this are powerful because they give us perspective. They remind us of just how fragile our world is, and yet at the same time, how astonishingly resilient it has been across billions of years. The moon, which has quietly shaped our tides, our seasons, and even our cultural imagination, becomes in this scenario a symbol of both creation and destruction. By thinking about it in the role of destroyer, we sharpen our appreciation of the role it has played as protector. Consider for a moment how finely balanced our existence really is. Earth spins at just the right tilt to create seasons. The moon keeps that tilt from wobbling too much, ensuring that climates remain relatively stable. The gravitational pull between Earth and the moon gives us tides, which are not only beautiful but essential to ecosystems and even to the earliest beginnings of life. The orbit of the moon is so steady that we can predict eclipses centuries in advance. All of this order, all of this harmony, happens in a universe where chaos and collision are the norm. When we picture the moon falling from the sky and destroying the world, we are really being asked to notice the miracle that it doesn't, that instead it has been our partner in balance for billions of years. The scenario also helps us reflect on the sheer improbability of life. If a single factor in our planetary system had been different, life might never have taken hold. Without the moon, Earth's climate could have been too unstable. Without stable tides, evolution might not have progressed as it did. Without the early collisions that shaped Earth and brought water and organic materials, the spark of biology might never have been ignited. To imagine that same moon destroying us is to confront the knife's edge we walk upon as a species, always at the mercy of forces greater than ourselves, and yet somehow thriving in spite of them. But beyond science, this thought experiment touches something deeply human. For thousands of years, people have looked up at the moon as a source of inspiration. It has guided travelers, kept time for farmers, and stirred the imaginations of poets. Entire mythologies have been written around it. To think of it as a destructive force is unsettling precisely because we are so used to seeing it as gentle, constant, and beautiful. And in this tension, between the moon as guardian and the moon as destroyer, we see reflected the dual nature of the universe itself. The cosmos is vast enough to cradle us, yet powerful enough to erase us in an instant. There is also a lesson here about humility. Humanity often acts as though we are masters of the earth, bending nature to our will, shaping landscapes, building machines, and sending rockets into space. But imagining something like the moon colliding with Earth reminds us that we are small, temporary, and vulnerable. We are guests on a planet that has existed long before us and will continue long after we are gone. Our technology, our ambition, even our collective achievements would mean nothing in the face of such an overwhelming cosmic event. That humbling truth can be frightening, but it can also be grounding. It reminds us to treat our fragile planet with greater care because the balance that sustains us is rare and precious. At the same time, this reflection need not only be about endings, it can also be about gratitude. We may never face the horror of the moon colliding with Earth, but by imagining it, we recognize what a gift stability truly is. We learn to value the quiet, ordinary cycles of day and night, of tides and seasons, of predictability that allows civilizations to rise and flourish. These cycles are not guaranteed in the grand theater of the cosmos. They are extraordinary, and they make our lives possible. To forget that is to forget the miracle of our existence. And so when we close the thought experiment, when we leave behind the terrifying images of a world consumed by its own moon, what remains is a simple but profound reminder. We live on a fragile, extraordinary planet in a universe of overwhelming power. And it is the rare stability of our moon's presence that has allowed life to thrive in the first place. And so when we bring all of this together, the tides rising in chaos, the ground trembling under impossible strain, the fiery collision itself, and the aftermath that would melt our world into a sea of magma, we realize that imagining the moon colliding with Earth is less about predicting disaster and more about understanding the miracle of our existence. The moon is not just a light in the night sky. It is a stabilizer of seasons, a shaper of tides, a shield, and a companion that has guided both life and imagination for billions of years. By exploring the impossible, we are reminded of the delicate balance that makes our lives possible, of the sheer fragility of this planet, and of the resilience of life that has endured countless challenges in cosmic history. The moon's collision would mean the end of us, but the act of imagining it teaches us to treasure the harmony we already have. Because in the vast universe where chaos and creation are inseparable, Earth's quiet stability, sustained in part by the moon, is not something ordinary. It is something extraordinary, and it is worth cherishing every single day.